What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Underdog Podcast. Today, I will be previewing the divisional round, giving you my picks here before these games get underway later today. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Starting with our first matchup, we have the Buffalo Bills and the Denver Broncos. Honestly, for me, this one is the biggest coin flip of the weekend. I think this one's going to be probably the closest matchup. I think these teams are pretty even. So starting with the Denver Broncos, who have not played yet this playoffs because they earned the number one overall seed. I think that this team, I think I've been lower on them for most of the year than others. I just haven't been moved by them, in the way that they have won against their opponents. And I think, that does matter. I think there's a lot of people who, for whatever reason, schedule talk has been a big part because of, kind of with the Patriots reemerging as Super Bowl contenders and, the easy schedule that they have faced with May this year, being in the MVP race. It's been kind of a big talk. And I think that people are not really talking about how the Broncos had a worse strength of victory compared to New England until the last week of the season when they beat the Chargers, who sat everybody, and then we beat the Dolphins in the last game of the season. So I think that they as well are a team that hasn't been tested. So they say, according to the strength of schedule and stuff. But I do think the Broncos are a good team. I don't know if they're a great team, though. I think we're going to find out today whether or not they are a great team. So I think the keys for Denver in this one is that the Bills are getting Ed Oliver back from the IR. So I think the big thing with them, I don't know if J.K. Dobbins is playing in this game or not. Okay, so it appears that Dobbins will not be back this week, but could be back for the AFC Championship game. So they're not going to have Dobbins. That's interesting. So they're going to have R.J. Harvey carry the load. So he's going to be a key piece of this game for the Denver Broncos. Is if R.J. Harvey can generate that running game, I think that will be, much better off for the Denver Broncos than not. I think that's the key for them in this game is can they run the football and can Bo Nix limit his mistakes in this one for sure. I haven't been the biggest, proponent of Bo Nix. I think that, he's a good quarterback. He's a solid quarterback. He's a quarterback you can win with. I don't think he's a quarterback you can win because of. And I think throughout the season, you saw a lot of, miscues with him in terms of, missed throws and stuff like that I do think is, going to play a factor in this one for sure. I think Denver's defense is phenomenal. I think that they are the best unit on the field in this game, led by Nick Bonito, who's had a great season for them. Zach Allen and Jeremiah Cooper and all those guys up front. I think that they can cause some havoc, some pressure on Josh Allen. And then, in the back end, obviously they're led by Patrick Surtain, but I do think Riley Moss is a guy that is going to have to play well in this one, especially considering the injuries that Buffalo has at receiver. There's no reason that he shouldn't play well, but he is someone who has been, picked on this season. So I think that that's, a key matchup for, both teams is who's going to win. Whoever Riley Moss is on, that matchup is going to be, certainly interesting. And as far as Buffalo goes, getting it done last week at Jacksonville, that was a big win for Josh Allen. It was his first career road playoff victory. He played phenomenal. I don't really have any concerns about Josh Allen. He's a playoff riser. He always has been. He shows up and he plays his best ball in the playoffs. James Cook did not have a good week last week for Buffalo, and I think he is this team's best weapon on offense. So I do think that he's going to really need to step up, especially with the injuries that they had at receiver last week to Gabe Davis, to Tyrell Shavers. I think that Cook's an even more important proponent of this offense for Buffalo. I think that he's going to have to be the engine that runs this offense, along with Josh Allen, of course. So I would expect a better game from James Cook. Khalil Shakir had a big game. Last week he had 12 catches for 72 yards. So I do think that Shakir needs to be, a steady rhythm in this offense, along with Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. They're going to be the go-to guys for Josh Allen with the injuries and stuff there. So I think that, we're going to have to see one of those guys step up, along with James Cook playing better. I think that that's the key offensively for for the Bills. And then I think defensively, it's kind of the same thing I've said all year is, can you stop the run? I think that Denver's run game has been pretty good this season, much better than it was last year. I don't think it's as good when J.K. Dobbins is in the lineup, so I think they're catching a break with J.K. Dobbins not playing this game. But, getting Ed Oliver back, he's not the best run defender, but he's going to, be out there and help your defense rushing the passer. So I think that that's going to be their biggest key is stopping the run. As far as the prediction-wise here, the line is pretty close. It's Denver minus 1.5. I'm going to take the Bills, maybe as like a cop for not picking them last week, but this is a really tight game. It's elite defense versus elite quarterback, in my opinion, and more often than not, the elite quarterback is usually the way to go. Not saying that the defense hasn't won these games, but I think an elite quarterback in the playoffs trumps anything, and I'm going to take the Bills. It's going to be a really close game. I would expect this to be like a 3-point game or less, but I'm going to take the Buffalo Bills in this very tight divisional round matchup. Moving on to the Saturday night game. We have the San Francisco 49ers and the Seattle Seahawks, another highly anticipated matchup. And this one's going to be interesting because a report came out last night, that Sam Darnold has not thrown a ball since Thursday. So that's really interesting. And they think he's going to be able to go, but they don't know, until they find out. I would assume he's going to go. But that is just a big nugget of news that dropped yesterday. So I think, talking about Seattle, earning the number 1 overall seed, these teams split in the regular season. I think the big key for Seattle is obviously Sam Darnold's health. What is he going to look like out there? And if he can't go, it's going to be Drew Lock, and it's going to be a totally different ball game. So I do think that Sam Darnold's health is the biggest key for Seattle here. Obviously, they have, some phenomenal players on offense. Jackson Smith-Njigba is probably going to win the Offensive Player of the Year. He's had an absolutely phenomenal season leading the NFL in receptions and receiving yards. He's been fantastic. They got Rashid Shaheed in a trade from the New Orleans Saints, and he's brought them a little bit of energy, particularly in the special teams game. Like, he had a big return. Was it the last time these teams played? Was that his big return where he had the touchdown, or was that the week before? I can't remember. But Rashid Shaheed has brought a different element to this offense as well. Cooper Kupp, is the third guy there who's had, his worst season to date, but he was a big time playoff performer in that Rams Super Bowl run. He's been a big time playoff performer throughout his career. So we'll see if he can, add a little edge to him, come these playoff run here. And then Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet are a great duo out of the backfield there. And then I think defensively, we've raved about this defense throughout the year. Mike McDonald, one of the guys up for Coach of the Year. And, if he did win it, wouldn't be mad. He absolutely, in most years, I think would deserve that award. But, this year is kind of a unique year where you got Mike McDonald, you got Liam Cohen, you got Mike Vrabel, and then, of course, you got Kyle Shanahan on the other side here. This defense is just loaded, though. You got Leonard Williams up front with DeMarcus Lawrence and Uchenna Nwosu, and then you got Ernest Jones in the middle, and you got Witherspoon and Woolen outside. I think defensively for the Seahawks, I think the big thing that they're going to have to worry about, obviously with the Kittle injury and everything else, I think is honing in on Christian McCaffrey, who led this team in both rushing and receiving yards throughout the season. I think that CMC is obviously the biggest threat with Kittle going down last week with the torn Achilles. So I think that they're going to have to hone in on him and make sure that they can contain him in this football game. I think the other thing that I am, thinking about with Seattle here is, they in the past, with these games have been able to force turnovers. I think that's another key thing for them defensively is, can they force a couple turnovers? We saw Brock Purdy throw 2 picks last week against Philadelphia, and they couldn't really take advantage of those opportunities. So, I think the big thing for both of these teams is going to be, taking advantage of those turnovers. Looking at San Francisco's side of things, I think, offensively, obviously, with the injuries and stuff that they've had, you had a big game from Demarcus Robinson last week. Who's going to step up this week? They get Ricky Pearsall back from injury this week. He looked pretty good in practice this week, but, no George Kittle. They haven't had Brandon Ayuk all year, obviously, but, it can't just be a McCaffrey game. We're going to need Jawan Jennings to step up. You're going to need Demarcus Robinson to step up. How is Ricky Pearsall going to look from that injury? I think that's the biggest key on offense is who's gonna step up besides Christian McCaffrey. And I think Brock Purdy, played really well last week. I think he needs to continue that play against this really good defense, get redemption for Week 18. And then I think defensively, like Robert Saleh has done an absolutely incredible job, with backups, with third stringers, guys like D. Winters stepping up, guys like Cleveland Farrell stepping up for this team. Fred Warner will not be playing in this game. He'll be back next week if they win this week. He'll be back for the NFC Championship game. I think the big key for San Francisco defensively is getting pressure. They've struggled at doing that all year. Saleh's been able to make up for it by simulating pressure, and forcing quarterbacks to make bad decisions. But I do question, like, can you get pressure, especially against a Seattle line that is much improved from years past? I think that's going to be the big key in this game is can they get pressure on Sam Darnold or Drew Lock, whoever's the quarterback, tonight in this game. I think that's going to be the big key for them. And obviously, like, it's a heavyweight battle with coaching too. Kyle Shanahan, offensive coach, Mike McDonald, defensive coach. That's the heavyweight matchup of this fight. Is that coaching battle, and who's going to win that? Obviously it's 1-1 on the season. Who's going to win, that rubber match? Seattle is favored by 7 in this game, which is interesting. I think, I don't know if those odds will change with the Sam Darnold news or whatever, but right now it's slotted at Seattle -7. I definitely think San Francisco is going to cover. I think San Francisco is going to cover that spread for sure. I think it's going to be a much closer game than, the odds have it. As far as who I'm going with, that's a tough one, man. That's a tough one. The Sam Darnold thing kind of throws a wrinkle in the matchup as well, because obviously that's a big deal that he hasn't thrown since Thursday, and they're kind of saving him. It was either Wednesday or Thursday. I think I'm going to take the upset. I think I'm going to take San Francisco to win this game. I just think that even with the Kittle injury and everything that they've suffered, I just think that, they've been here before and they know exactly what to expect. I think that they're going to have guys step up on the offensive side of the ball, and I think that Robert Saleh is going to coach a phenomenal defense on Saturday night, and I think that they're going to get it done. I'm going to go with the 49ers in a really close game, probably another 3-point, 4-point victory. But I'm going to take the experience with this one. I'm going to take the 49ers. Moving to Sunday here. First game on Sunday, we've got the New England Patriots against the Houston Texans on Sunday afternoon. So let's start with the New England Patriots. Obviously, Drake May playoff debut last week, was a little rocky to start with. He missed that touchdown Austin Hooper in the second half, and then he kind of settled in after that. He was really good at making plays with his feet in that game, though. But I expect Drake May, who made his first career start against this Texans defense, to be a little bit more locked in when the game starts and everything. Now he's got one playoff game under his belt. I think as far as the run game goes, I think it's going to be, a mix of Ramondre Stevenson and Travion Henderson. We saw, Ramondre really step up last week. He had one of the best games of his career, and Travion kind of struggle. He's kind of been like week to week as far as, his impact. And then in the receiving game, I think it is a big question mark, for the Patriots. I think, can these guys go out there and beat man coverage? We've seen them, do it sometimes throughout the year and other times not so. Stephon Diggs had a really quiet game last week. It was really a lot of Kayshon Boutte and not really much of anybody else. So, I expect Stephon Diggs, who is a former Texan, to come out here against his former team and, light it up. I expect Boutte to come out there, have a good game, but, can we get somebody else other than those two, along with Hunter Henry as well, who had some big catches in the wild card game, caught that touchdown and everything. And then I think defensively for New England, I think the big key for them is like pressure. They weren't able to get pressure in that first half against the Chargers, and even though they were stalling out on drives, like it was obvious. And then they brought a little bit of that heat in the second half, and they were able to get, tack on the pressures, tack on the sacks and everything. So I do think that, that's the biggest question mark with the Patriots defense, and it has been all year, is what does the pass rush look like? Kayvon Chason had a good week last week. Christian Barmore and Milton Williams were game wreckers in that game last week. We don't know if Harold Landry's playing or not, but he was pretty quiet last week. And then I think having Christian Gonzalez for this game is huge, especially with Nico Collins out. We saw what him and Carlton Davis and Marcus Jones did last week. They were shut down against the Chargers. I expect them to have, I don't know if I expect them to have that same performance, because that performance was incredible, but I expect them to have a, similar type of performance, especially with Nico Collins out and shutting down these young receivers for Houston. But I do think that the pass rush, again, biggest key for the Patriots in this one. Offensively, looking at the Texans side of things here, Stroud really, really struggled against Pittsburgh. That was, if other than maybe his rookie year against Baltimore, that was the shakiest he's looked. So I do think that he's the biggest key in this one. Is can he, kind of hone in on the mistakes that he had in the wild card game, not put the ball on the ground as much. Both these quarterbacks put the ball on the ground. I think May fumbled twice and Stroud fumbled 5 times. That's a big deal. For Houston this game, is can you take care of the football, especially against a defense that is coming off a really, really good wild card performance. I thought that Woody Marks played maybe his best game of the season against Pittsburgh. He was really, really good for them. I think he needs to continue that energy. He had, I think, nearly 6 yards of carry last week, and Nick Chubb also was at like 4.8 yards of carry. So that duo needs to show up, especially with the way New England played the run last week, limiting the Chargers in the run game. I think Kamani Vidal had like 31 rushing yards, and Marion Hampton only had 1 carry, and Justin Herbert couldn't really do much in the scrambling game. So I do think that Woody Marks and Nick Chubb are going to be, another key to the Texans' offense. And then obviously the receiving game, like no Nico Collins, that's a big deal. 1,000-yard receiver for them once again this year. Who's going to step up for them? Christian Kirk had a phenomenal game, against Pittsburgh last week. Does he do it again? Is it, Dalton Schultz, who's been a really steady presence for them all season? Is it one of the Iowa State trio in Jaden Higgins, Xavier Hutchinson, or Jalen Knowles? Is it one of those guys stepping up? It's going to be really interesting to see who comes through for Houston in that receiving game. And then obviously this defense is the talk. I think everybody is picking Houston because of this defense, and rightfully so. They're the best defense in the National Football League. They've got a really phenomenal edge duo, the best in the league, in Daniil Hunter and Will Anderson Jr., and then they've got guys in the middle, and Sheldon Rankins, who had a big game last week. And I think their coverage unit is really good. They've got Derek Stingley Jr., who was a first-team All-Pro. Don't know if he should have been, but he was a first-team All-Pro. Kamari Lassiter, who's a phenomenal corner opposite of him. They've got Jalen Petrie in the nickel. They've got Kalen Bullock in the back end. They're a really phenomenal unit. They really are. I've got, really nothing to say bad about Houston's defense. They're really good. And I think the key for them is, like, if you can continue to get pressure on Drake May, that's going to force him to, to use his feet a little bit more, to maybe rush a throw here and there. Like, that pass rush has just got to be that pass rush for them to win this game, I think, especially against, that left side of the O-line, and Will Campbell and Jared Wilson really struggled on Sunday night against the Chargers. I think that they can take advantage of that matchup maybe with Will Anderson there. As far as my pick for this one, I think they have New England favored by 3 in this one. They have New England favored by 3. That's what the odds are. Listen, man, everybody and their mother's taking the Texans in this one. Look at like every analyst, on ESPN, NFL Live, they all picked Houston. Everybody's picking Houston. I'm not fading my own team, man. Get out of here. Get out of here, man. Get out of here with that. Stay on that side. Keep picking Houston. Keep picking everybody else. I'm taking the New England Patriots at home against the Houston Texans, who have never beaten us in Gillette Stadium, I believe. I'm gonna take the Patriots, excuse me, to win this one. I do think it'll be a close matchup. It'll be similar to the wild card game against the Chargers. I think it'll be a close matchup, but I'm gonna take the Patriots in this one. Give me the Patriots by a touchdown. I think they cover in this one as well. And then for our final matchup on Sunday night, we've got the Los Angeles Rams against the Chicago Bears. Really interesting matchup here. Really interesting matchup. Let's start it off with the Chicago Bears. Caleb Williams played phenomenal in the wild card round. He's going to have to do that again for a second week in a row. He's just phenomenal, man. I mean, he was phenomenal in that game. He's been phenomenal all year. The addition to Ben Johnson, as his head coach, has been working wonders for him. I think this run game is going to be interesting. They're going to have to complement them for sure, I think, with Swift and Monangai, who kind of had a measly impact, in the wild card round, but I do think that they're going to have to, keep the Rams on their toes defensively. The Panthers weren't really able to get anything running last week against, a tough Rams front, but I think the Bears are going to have to do that, in order to, have a balanced offense here. As far as the receiving game goes, Colston Loveland was phenomenal last week. He was the, star of the show last week. DJ Moore catching that touchdown to, put the Bears in the lead. Rome Odunze and Luther Burden were getting back acquainted into the offense after being injured, so I think that they'll be even more of an impact this week. I think the key offensively for Chicago is attacking this Rams secondary, which we know is their biggest weakness. You gotta utilize all the tools in the toolbox. You got to utilize Colston Loveland, over the middle of the field against those linebackers. You got to utilize DJ Moore as, kind of your, design touches guy, getting them going on the outside there. Use Rome Odunze over the middle of the field. Use Luther Burden as your deep threat, design touches as well in there. Utilize DeAndre Swift and, his ability to, be an impact in the receiving game as well as the rushing game. Use Monangai as that, kind of lead back, in this game. I think that that's going to be the biggest key for them is attacking that secondary in every way that they possibly can. I think that's the big thing for them. And then, on the defensive side of the ball, they played a much better second half than they did, in the first half of last week's game. I do think that, the big key for them is pressure. I think that they didn't really touch Jordan Love last week for the most part. I think Montez Sweat's going to have a big game this week, against the Rams offensive line. And I think that, Jervon Dexter and some of those other guys up front are going to have to, help him, get after Matthew Stafford, who we saw last week, when the Panthers got pressure on him, really struggled. And I think that that's the big key for them in this matchup. And I think limiting Puka Nacua is the other thing, making sure that Tremaine Edmonds is not on him, making sure that it's Kyler Gordon or, Jalen Johnson or one of those guys. I think definitely limiting Puka Nacua is the other key for them defensively. And I think that the Bears secondary played really well last week, especially in the second half. They were able to, get some ball production there. They weren't able to get an interception off Jordan Love, but they were able to, break up some passes, cause some bad throws from Jordan Love. So I think that that's another key for them. Moving over to the Rams side of things, obviously, you got Matthew Stafford there, who is the MVP favorite. What does he look like with the hand injury that he, he knocked his hand on one of his linemen last week. So I do think that that's going to be, interesting to see how he looks, and especially with the weather in this game. It's a dome team coming to a cold weather place, man. It's going to be really, really interesting to see, how they look in this cold weather. We saw them play in the snow in Philly last year, and they came up short. We'll see if they can do, make amends for that, in this game against the Chicago Bears. I think Kyron Williams, he's going to be the big key in this game. I think Puka Nacua was phenomenal last week. Devontae Adams was phenomenal last week. I do think Kyron Williams is going to be the key this week, especially with the weather and the way that is. I think that Kyron Williams is going to have to really step it up, and be that kind of driving force that he has been for this team, really steady force. Blake Corum, his running mate there in Los Angeles is going to have to be a factor as well in that run game. I think that they're going to really need to be able to, balance this offense out a little bit. They were able to get some success last week in the run game, but I think they're going to really have to lean on that this week, especially with the weather. And then I think defensively, kind of similar to Chicago, I think it's getting pressure. I think that, Jared Verse was pretty quiet last week. Byron Young was pretty quiet last week. Braden Fisk had a sack. Kobe Turner was pretty quiet last week, though. I think they're going to have to get, some pressure up front, especially with an offensive line that's missing Ozzie Trapillo. He went down last week for the Chicago Bears. I think that they're going to have to take advantage of that matchup. I think Braxton Jones did get elevated off of IR, but I still think that, that's a favorable matchup for the Los Angeles Rams there. I think that that's their big key defensively, along with their secondary. Like, how is their secondary going to look in this game? They were really, really shaky against Carolina Panthers, and, they've been shaky all year, and, that's their other key is, like, how well are they going to hold up in the back end, especially if that pass rush can't get there? The pass rush gets there a little bit, that helps out the secondary. So I think the pass rush is really going to be the key in this game for the Los Angeles Rams. Rams are 4.5-point favorites. The weather is a big factor in this game for me. The weather's a big factor in this game. I've gone with one underdog and two favorites here. This is a tough one. All these matchups have been really tough, except for, the Pats game for me, because I don't see a way that they're going to lose. But I think I'm going to take the Bears here. And that might be some backtracking of last week, but I think the weather, big part in this game. But I also think that the Bears are just playing really well right now, man. They played really well last week. They surprised me, especially with their comeback. Like, you can never count out the Bears this season. Like, they have been the comeback kids, and I think that, they may just do it again this week against the Los Angeles Rams. But I think I'm going to take the Bears here. Another really close game, but I think I'm going to take Chicago. I think, especially with that weather, man, I think that it's it's gonna play to the Chicago Bears' strengths, and I'm gonna take the Bears in this one. But that's another tough one, man. It's another tough one. They're all tough this week. It's getting to that point in the season where it's going to be really tough to pick these games. I thought Wild Card Weekend was tough, man, and this one's tough. But I think that's what I'm going to go with. So to recap my picks, I'm taking the Bills over the Broncos. I'm taking the 49ers over the Seahawks. I'm taking the Patriots over the Texans. And I'm taking the Bears over the Rams. So let me know what you guys think of those picks down in the comment section below. Let me know which picks you agree with, disagree with. Let me know in the comment section down below. And stay tuned for Monday. I'm going to have a divisional round recap. And then I'm also going to do a coaching preview, coach carousel preview, kind of middle of the week. And then I'll get my AFC and NFC championship picks out probably either on Friday or Saturday of next week. We'll see what day that is. But thanks for watching, everybody, and I hope you have a great day enjoying this great slate of playoff football today and tomorrow. Have a great weekend, and peace.